We often like to imagine the creation of the United States as a sudden stroke of genius. A group of brilliant men locked themselves in a room in Philadelphia, debated for months, and emerged with an entirely original modern democracy. But the late 18th century was a hostile environment for that kind of experiment. Almost the entire globe was partitioned and controlled by top-down power structures, entrenched monarchs, sprawling empires, and state-mandated churches. Breaking away from one of those empires left the early Americans with a terrifying political vacuum. They needed a way to unite 13 fiercely independent, culturally distinct states for mutual defense, without accidentally installing a new king in the process. They didn't have to rely entirely on abstract theory to solve this problem. A functioning, real-world prototype for a decentralized republic already existed, quietly operating just across the Atlantic. We rarely talk about this reliance on a foreign model today. Nations naturally prefer their origin stories to be tales of pure, isolated self-invention, rather than the messy, pragmatic reality of borrowing ideas from someone else. Thomas Jefferson spent months traveling through the Dutch Republic in the 1780s, treating his diplomatic post as a methodical investigation into how a working system of decentralized power actually functioned. This is the original handwritten draft of the United States Declaration of Independence, a document heavily shaped by Jefferson's research. When you look at the physical parchment, you are looking at the culmination of months spent analyzing European political structures. Jefferson and his peers focused on identifying specific structural mechanics, the actual legal levers and pulleys required to make a republic run without a monarch. Drafting these early founding documents was an exercise in political engineering. To guarantee the math worked, they needed to observe a European model that had already survived the test of time. This antique map shows the Netherlands, known then as the Dutch Republic. Among a continent dominated by massive centralized kingdoms, it was a fragmented collection of provinces that had to figure out how to cooperate to survive. To maintain its independence, this small maritime society built an incredible economic engine. They relied heavily on naval infrastructure, bustling docks, and a global trade network that made them one of the wealthiest regions on Earth. That wealth was managed through a highly specific political culture. Above all else, the Dutch maintained a deep institutionalized suspicion of concentrated authority. They refused to let power pool in one single office. Because power was decentralized, the cities along these bustling canals became Europe's primary safe haven. Religious minorities, political dissidents, and philosophers, including the Pilgrims before they sailed for America, found a society built on commerce and interaction rather than strict royal decrees. By combining commercial capitalism with relative religious tolerance, the Dutch Republic stood out. For early American leaders staring across the Atlantic, it looked exactly like the future they wanted to build. Benjamin Franklin and John Adams traded this system as a living political laboratory. They scrutinized it to solve the most dangerous design flaw facing the young United States: how to balance the rights of the individual states against the needs of a federal government. We can see the roots of that solution in this text. This is the Union of Utrecht, signed in 1579. It acted as the constitutional foundation for the Dutch provinces, and its structure shares remarkable similarities with later American federalism. Reading through the densely packed handwriting, the core mechanism becomes clear. The treaty outlines a delicate, precise agreement, maintaining local provincial authority for daily life, while allowing for strict national coordination whenever a military or economic crisis threatened the whole. But constitutional theory has a fatal limit. A revolution will collapse, regardless of its brilliant legal structure, if it runs out of money to pay its soldiers. John Adams recognized this immediate threat and spent years negotiating in Amsterdam. He successfully secured heavy investments from Dutch bankers. These physical copper gulden represent the cold, tangible capital that functionally bankrolled the American Revolution. The Netherlands offered the Founding Fathers a dual lifeline. It provided the intellectual legal structure to organize the United States and the literal financial capital required to keep it alive. To be clear, the United States Constitution is not a direct word-for-word translation of Dutch law. The Founding Fathers synthesized Dutch federal mechanics with British common law, Roman civic traditions, and their own colonial experiences. This diagram illustrates that exact constitutional synthesis. It required carefully engineering the connections so that fragmented independent states could link to a central federal hub without allowing that central hub to overpower the local nodes and slide back into authoritarianism. The Dutch Republic provided the Founding Fathers with real-world proof that a wealthy, decentralized republic could successfully hold its ground against the world's most hostile empires. The foundations of the American superpower were not constructed in a vacuum. They evolved quietly from the architecture of a much smaller European republic. It is a powerful reminder that history is highly connected. Ideas travel, systems adapt, and no civilization ever builds itself entirely alone.